Welcome to the Spent the Rent podcast. I am your host, Patty Rose. My guest today is real estate agent and Spent the Rent podcast executive producer, Vince Casey. Vince, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much.
As I had mentioned, you are a behind the scenes and executive producer. What that means is that you donate to the podcast on a monthly basis through Patreon, which I super appreciate. It is what helps me do this, and it continues to allow the podcast to grow. And if you, the listener or watcher, are interested in becoming a donor or an executive producer, donors $5 a month, executive producers a little more. Go to my website. It's STRPOD.com. And that would be amazing. So thank you so much for your support, Vince. It's great. And it's been great to get to know you and become friends behind the scenes. I'm a big fan of what you're up to. So I wanted to have you on the podcast.
Yeah, this is great. Thank you so much.
So I wanted to have you on to discuss, like I had mentioned, you work in real estate in the Lane County area. And I wanted to have you on to discuss the housing market in Lane County and talk about what it takes for someone to get into a home. Oregon recently set a cap on the rising rent prices for 2023 at 14.9% annually, which is outrageous. It's pretty alarming. It's going up from about 9%. So that's a pretty big hike. And with high gas prices and the increase in the cost of groceries, this leaves very little wiggle room for folks moving forward. One of the only ways to avoid paying more and more every year in rent is by locking in a mortgage and becoming a homeowner. I know that it's not something everyone is in a position to do, but I wanted to talk about what it takes. So for at least for some, goals can be set to get moving in that direction. So I guess let's just get started. What are the qualifications and requirements to purchase a home?
Well, the main thing they're going to look at, you got to get pre-approved with a lender, and they're going to want to look at 2 years of job stability, which is either the same job or like if you kind of took a pay increase to go somewhere else, that's fine. They're also going to take 2 years of taxes. They're going to pull your credit report, which I believe there's an FHA program floating out there. It would take as low as 580. So that's kind of the basement for your credit score. And in most cases, you have to have a pretty nice little chunk of cash set aside for a down payment and for your closing costs and whatnot.
Yeah, that's the difficult thing. I mean, I think you had kind of mentioned it, but are there any programs currently for first-time buyers to help out with the down payment? And roughly how much is needed for the median home down payment in our area?
Well, there are a few programs out there. If you wanted to look at, say, an FHA program, they usually want to do a 3.5% down payment. So if you're looking at the range of 300,000, that's just a little over $10,000. To go on top of that, usually you're going to have closing costs. Now that the market's starting to shift a little bit, you could certainly ask for your closing costs to be covered in some offers, and I think that would be considered. But all the deals I've been part of lately, you've been looking at about 8,500 to around 13,000 for closing costs.
And that's a lot. That's a big chunk of change.
It's
but
huge.
That's kind of why I wanted to do this, because I want to just kind of talk about it. It's one of the things that it's really taboo for people to talk about how much they paid for their home and how much things cost. And I think it's also intimidating for potential buyers to reach out to a realtor, what they may consider a salesman in a way, because they're like, well, I don't want to have this person harass me or it be just exposed that I'm not in a position to do it. So I just kind of wanted to do this because I want these things to be discussed more openly so that people kind of just understand how it all works,
Right.
And I mean, I'm fortunate that I was able to buy a home in 2018. But that's pretty much because of my partner. I mean, she did a lot of the legwork, and she has, I could get into that my personal situation, but I was lucky enough to where I kind of was just like, where do I sign kind of thing. So it worked out well. So are there any other expenses associated with the home purchase that people may need to be aware of before they kind of jump into the research?
Well, the main thing is once you get under contract, you will be looking at an inspection. So generally for like a normal size house, you'd be looking at about $450 for an inspector. Most of the other expenses are just going to be kind of loan related. Obviously, you're paying a lender his fee, but that's sort of bundled into closing costs. So Yeah, a lot of people get paid when you buy a home, and I can see why it kind of props up the market for sure.
Sure.
But one thing I didn't get into whenever you were talking about loan programs, if people were willing or interested in looking at rural areas, there is a program called a USDA loan. And basically, what that does is it encourages people to move to more rural areas. And that includes Veneta, even Cresswell,
Wow.
Cottage Grove. And with that program, there is a zero down payment involved. So
Wow.
if you're out there and you don't know where your down payment's going to come from, and you do have enough to maybe talk about closing costs, um, they are a weaker loan program. So if you're running up against multiple offers, sometimes they won't be looked at as seriously. But now that purchasing is slowing down, especially in the fall, those programs absolutely will get you in a house. So if that's something you're willing to do, or maybe something you even want to do, I'd certainly look into it.
Yeah, there's definitely perks. I mean, especially as Eugene and Springfield continue to grow, for people that are from here, there's perks, to living in a smaller area like Cottage Grove or Crestwell. I wouldn't live in Crestwell, but no,
Well,
I'm
everybody's
just
got
kidding. I'm
their
just kidding.
own
I'm just
preference.
kidding. I'm kidding. No, I'm not kidding. Uh,
Yeah,
uh, are there any other expenses? I already said that. What about realtor fees? Oh no, actually, to kind of follow up on what we just talked about,
sure.
when it comes to inspections and the cost, you said like roughly $450.
Mhm.
We had to do 2 inspections, and it was a really weird thing because the square footage, because there was an addition done in our house, by the previous owner, that we wanted it to be added to the square footage, which actually raised the cost. It's really interesting how things can work out,
Sure.
but we had to do it twice. Now, is that something you have to pay out of pocket, or is that going to be just kind of pushed into the whole loan?
Generally, that would be something you're putting on a credit card or paying out of pocket for.
Yeah.
Yeah, it can be a little weird sometimes. Like inspectors will come in and they tell you like what's going on with your home, but they're also kind of vague. Like, well, I noticed there's something going on with your roof, but then they won't like necessarily call it the roof. Then you got to bring in a roofing inspector, and that's like another 200, 250. Some people, if you're just getting a quote, like they'll give you a quote for free, but if you're getting another like adding an inspection on, then that'll be an extra charge.
Yeah.
There's like structural engineers that will come out and look at cracks and foundation. So yeah, I mean, if you're dealing with a home that's got a few different things going on, that can certainly
And
add
this
up.
for the buyer. So I mean, that's
Yeah,
that part I don't understand why it's not like on the seller to be like, we're good.
right. Some sellers that are highly motivated will have an inspection report for you, and they're just like, boom,
Yeah.
this is our report. It's clean, and they're trying to kind of get all that stuff out of the way. But you know, I think the sellers had a lot of the power these last few years in the real estate market. So we might see some of that start to shift as it gets harder to sell homes in Lane County.
Sure.
And
Sure.
that's just a prediction. I don't have a crystal ball, but with these APR it's raising, it is going a little bit. And I think that there's just a little bit more.
Right. I mentioned one out of potentially would be if it comes back and it's a station fee to rent, where that didn't go well, and now and that sucks. Um, real do potential realtor, or does the seller's costs?
Oh, one area that the lucky when they're in a home, the sellers, so you're off the
That's good.
yeah.
You had mentioned APR costs. In an attempt to curb inflation, the Biden administration is raising interest rates again. And they're not; these are substantial increases, like 0.75%, which is big. And there's as APR rates going up. My question is, what does that mean for buyers? But afterwards, I want to talk about how inflation, interest rates kind of work.
Okay, sure. Yeah, basically what that means for the buyers, your APR rate is the percentage that they tack on to the purchase of your home. So if people were pre-approved for say $400,000, they are lowering their pre-approval now. So they might only pre-approve for 300,000. There's a lot of people that were kind of floating in that 250, 300 range. And when the APR rates rose, they basically got priced out of the market. So they can't really buy a home unless they can find something out there that's ridiculously cheap. There's not really
And there's
anything.
not. Like,
No.
I don't think you can find a house in Eugene for under 300,000. No.
You can, but you'd be looking at a condo or a fixer. So
Yeah.
usually something's going on with the house if it's below that.
Right.
But so yeah, basically, financially, we're talking about 1 point equals about $100 to your monthly payment. So if things rose from 3.25, now they're probably floating in between. I saw somebody get pre-approved at 6.99 the other day, and that does vary on your credit score. So I don't want you to just assume that would be
Right.
your rate. But so yeah, you just added basically $300 to your monthly payment. To probably most people were already kind of struggling or having a hard time, that might have made them push them out of the market as well. So it can be tough. It's still probably better than throwing away money on rent if you can get in there and make all the numbers work. I know FHA, I saw someone get pre-approved at 5.5, so they are trying to alleviate some things for first-time home buyers and giving them special programs and special points. You can also buy down your rate if you have that capability. Of course, again, that's more money,
That's just more money.
which is what most
How does
people
that
are.
how does that work? So when you buy down your rate,
Well, you probably have to talk to a lender to get all the ins and outs. Whenever I bought my home, I got pre-approved at 5.25. I believe this was like in May, and I bought it down to 4.25, which in the long run is going to save me about $90,000.
is that just paying a higher down payment?
Yeah, you just basically kind of add to the pile of money that goes towards the lender. So my personal buy down was 18K. So it's not it's not a small chunk, but in the long run, it's going to save me quite a bit of money.
So now, what are the average rates right now for first time buyers, and what can affect the rate that someone can get?
Well, certainly they're going to look at your credit score, and it also like your debt to income ratio, which is just like how much you're paying each month on cars and bills and whatnot. And they're going to be just looking at your job history. So the stronger a buyer you are, the better rate through you're going to get. So always making it harder and harder for the little guy, for sure.
I don't know, like 6 or 7 years ago, when I finally got my head out of my ass, I downloaded Credit Karma. And I don't think that Credit Karma is like the most accurate thing, but I do think that it's a good tool to use, because for me, I had a lot of credit card debt, and this is how I watched my credit rating really, really go up. I mean, and I'm fortunate enough that I do. I'm pretty modest with my stuff, what I have, my assets and whatnot, but I do have a decent income, and it's pretty consistent. Well, I don't know, but anyways, I was able to have extra money at the end of the month. Our kids are older, they're a little bit more self-sufficient, that kind of stuff. And so I downloaded Credit Karma, and I really made it my point every month that I was going to put money towards credit cards, and I was able to pay off quite a bit. And I watched that soar, but I do think without utilizing that tool, I wouldn't have been able to have it as much in the forefront of my mind, because I was seeing the impact of how $100 here, $200 there was working. It was a lot. I mean, we lived in an apartment very below our means, and that helped a lot, that we lived in a really humble apartment with 2 incomes. And that's the thing nowadays, is that you absolutely, unfortunately, have to have 2 incomes to be able to do this. And, that might deter people, without getting too off the point. That might deter people too to jumping into being a home buyer, because if you're not married, you don't know the stability in your relationship. That can be really difficult, those things. And that's a whole different conversation. But yeah, I mean, it's just tough. I know that doing this podcast, I was like, it's really difficult, because I don't want to be like, well, just come on, buy a home. It's easy. And it's not. It's very difficult, and it's a huge, huge, huge undertaking. But that being said, there's things that you can do that you can start getting in that direction. With higher interest rates, is this a time that potential buyers should wait to look into buying a home? Is there ever a time that it's better to be renting?
Oh, that is a question that I usually leave up to the individual. Well, certainly with APR rates going higher, it's easier to make a purchase. You're not fighting people off like just about 6 months ago. I was writing for offers for people that were releasing their inspections, releasing their appraisal contingency, 100K over asking, and they were just getting rejected. because there was people coming in with cash that were just blowing people out of the water that
Wow. 100,000 over asking price.
and getting rejected.
Oh my God.
So in that regard, like, hey, I can walk up to a house on open house day and make a full price offer, and I'm going to get the house. So that's a big relief for buyers. Probably for about every 10K that you're spending, you can roughly estimate it's going to be $60. So if somebody was writing, had a 3.25 APR rate, and then they were writing 100K over asking, they're still probably kind of meeting the same point that they would have if they're making an offer today. The difference being is if your offer is strong enough, you can get it accepted a little bit easier now. So there's a little bit of give and take. Some of it's fun, some of it's not fun. But I would say if you're looking for a house, and I'd still be rather paying higher APR rates than paying rent.
Yeah, there's just no way. I mean, you talked about not having a crystal ball. There's just no way to project the future. I think that because of 2008, I don't know how long you've been doing real estate, if you were working during that time, but I think that people think that that's going to happen again, that there's a bubble, but the difference is that in those days, that was variable income or variable interest rates, meaning that it was based on the market. Is that correct? Like, can you explain that a little bit?
Well, the best way to explain 2008 to 2012 would probably be to watch The Big Short if you've got that.
Absolutely.
But a very short, brief synopsis of that scenario is people were writing bad mortgages. They weren't really verifying your income. They weren't requiring a certain credit score. People were just getting houses left and right, and they started defaulting on their loans.
Yeah.
And that's what caused the housing market to crash then. So as hard as it is now to purchase a home, I don't foresee another market crash. But I think we might have seen a little bit of, and I'm making this word up, faulty appreciation. Homes increased about 23% last year. And because everybody was paying so much over asking to get a home, we're using all of those homes for comps right now to price our homes now. And things are sitting on the market longer. We're starting to see some price dips. And that's what people are saying, like, oh, the market's going backwards. It's not going backwards, but um, uh, in general, Eugene seemed to appreciate about 6 to 9% each year. So that 23% was a big spike. And I think once the dust settles, we're probably going to see that homes are going to continue on that trend of about 6 to 9%. So we might see a few prices fall back, and homes stay on the market a little bit longer until we meet like that kind of true value that most homes have.
And the benefit of, and this is, I mean, above my pay grade, but the benefit of if you already own a home and the value goes down is that your taxes are less, and I don't know how long or how often that is factored in or like appraised essentially, or if it's just an estimate. But man, because that's the one thing about when you get a mortgage, it's like, oh yeah, it's great when you look on Zillow and you're like, my house went up by $90,000, but that means that at the end of the year, you're going to end up paying more in taxes for the supposed value, even though you're not selling it. And so that's a difficult thing too. So I still would take that over the potential rent increase, because I don't think that they match up. Like the cost of home ownership and the cost of rent, they don't match up. And like you had said, it's like the deck is usually stacked against the little guy, so
yeah,
pretty frustrating. So how do folks get started? Do they just reach out to you? I mean, how do you find most of your potential clients?
Oh, wow. I just say through building community, staying in touch with friends, and you kind of get known as the guy that does real estate. I've been lucky enough to get teamed up with an investor who does quite a few deals. And that's probably the bread and butter of my business. So every real estate agent's a little bit different on how they go about stuff. I try to stay away from doing a bunch of online marketing just because those relationships aren't as personal, and it seems like there's quite a bit more work whenever you're working with people that you already know and trust you. It's usually a pretty smooth transaction.
So overview, if you're an average home, like 3 bedrooms, we'll say, in Eugene or Springfield, I know that's going to vary a lot. What are we looking at? Like, what kind of, as of right now, if you were looking to buy a home, how much do you need down roughly before it's even really something that's feasible, how much would you need down, and what are you looking at on your monthly costs?
Well, that situation could really vary, because like I mentioned earlier, you can get your closing costs covered if you're in part of the right deal and the seller needs to sell and they're priced wrong, then you can make them a full price offer and ask for all your closing costs to be covered, and that's $8,500 off the table. So certainly something to be aware of.
It's the loan, correct?
Uh, Paid at closing.
Out of
Yeah. So yeah, basically that's do like a quick look at the offer answer some of your questions.
yeah.
The home with the house, make an offer. Um, so then you have your eight offer. If you are looking home, you want to go ahead and get with a lender first. So once you have, and that kind of makes it we'll offer cases be like a situation to wait, see which offer they choose. Below reason when it has your offer would then your contract you submit earn only about 1% of home. It's just like a good faith saying I'm willing to down and talk about buying your home. Then your period and inspection period weeks, and it gives you opportunity just for the history, get an inspector in, where all the cards are right for this to be the home you buy. After the inspection period is over, you'll lose your earn, or I mean, it'll still be there, but you lose the forfeit your earnest. So if you want to get out, it's best to do it in the first 2 weeks. At that point, all you have to do is deliver a letter saying we're no longer interested. Both parties don't have to agree. The deal is done. So that they do give you quite a bit of buying power in Oregon. Not every state has that. So after that, then an appraiser is going to come out that represents the lender, and he's going to check out the house and make sure that it appraises at the value that your loan is set at. Most of the time, that process goes fairly smoothly, but I have seen a few appraisers come in low, and it can mess up a deal pretty quick. So after you're through the appraisal process, you're going to come in the day of closing with your down payment money. They're going to have you sign about 400 forms.
Yeah.
And then you're a homeowner. That's a really generic breakdown. Obviously, every deal is kind of unique to itself. I'd be happy to talk about unique scenarios offline, but that's just kind of the basis.
Right. So again, like the total that, probably $10,000 before you're really gonna jump into it.
Yeah.
And that's a big chunk of change, and I get that, but I mean, it's doable. It's just it's just tough because on this show I definitely, spent the rent. The name Spent the Rent started because I spent rent money to buy a microphone to start making music, literally. And so I have full understanding of how difficult it can be to just get by every month, and it's it's just really difficult. That this is one of those things in life that nothing's going to happen for you. You have to kind of do it yourself, and so that means that you have to put yourself in position to do that, which means that you got to think about your cash flow. Shout out to Oregon Cash Flow Pro, my title sponsor. That's what he's all about. James Barber talks about if you maximize your cash flow and think about what's going out, then that allows you to make better financial decisions. And that's I mean, it's a difficult thing that I always hate it when you watch politicians say, well, maybe you should just not have an iPhone, and things like that. And it's like, oh, I mean, a lot of times the issue is making a livable wage and whatnot. We could be here for days talking about that. Yeah. So I want to thank you, for talking about some of this stuff. If anybody's interested, they can reach out to you directly, or you can go to vincecasey.com. Is it .com? Yeah, vincecasey.com for more info. If you're interested in buying a home, or if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to Vince. I'm sure that he can answer your questions, even if you're kind of like cautious about buying. I'm sure that he's totally down to tell you what you need to to know about, those steps.
Yeah, I would say, even if you're just curious, talk to a lender. They'll give you great tips on how to build credit and what you need to do to be in a position to buy a home. And for me and for a lot of people, I think that's the biggest thing is just start making steps. Even if you're just like setting aside $100 a month, like it's amazing what happens once you make a decision in your mind, like I'm going to do something. I feel like the universe just kind of like supports you on whatever that is. Whenever I made a decision to buy a house, it was a pretty, yeah, it was a pretty unique situation. I wasn't in a position at all. I just decided I wanted to be a homeowner. And at the time I was doing sales, and we rolled out like a new incentive program that I just happened to like completely crush it on the month that they rolled out the new program, and all the stars aligned, and I actually got enough for my down payment like in like 2 months.
Well, I mean, and that's like, there's certain, I almost felt guilty about this during the pandemic, during the quarantine. There was this push, if you could, to refinance your home. And we had bought 2 years before that. So most cases you're like, that's not possible. I just bought it, but we were able to, and we were able to lower interest rate. Now, that being said, like I almost felt guilty like doing this, because I'm like, I see so many of my friends that are struggling. And then I realized, I'm like, there is in life going to be opportunities where you benefit and where you don't. It's just that simple. And there's been so many times in my life that I haven't, that in 2008, I wasn't in a position when housing costs were the lowest that we've seen in our lifetime, maybe, or at least, I mean, it obviously went up and then it dropped, but it was harder to get a loan, for one. And I was not in a position to do so, because my credit was bad and all that kind of stuff. So you're not able to kind of benefit from those downturns. That's the difficult thing about this whole thing. It's like, if you're benefiting from the downside, if you're like, oh yeah, it's like, I'm going to wait until everything collapses. Think about how many people that's destroying their lives, so we don't want that. You don't want a downturn. You don't want it to be like just constantly out of control, wild, wild west, like what it seemed like 2 summers ago. I mean, the year we bought, all of it was probably the wrong time to be buying, but the cost has gone up a lot. So, I mean, I'm like, whatever, man, we couldn't have waited, and so we were buying it when we were getting outbid. We made multiple bids at the same time, which is taboo. I know that, because you're not supposed to make a bid if you're not going to get the house. But our realtor at the time was like, you will be outbid on this one. So if you want it, the one that we wanted, we did get outbid by a lot.
Yeah.
But so it was wild, wild west. But that being said, fast forward, it's been 4 years, and the value of the house has gone up by 40%, which is insane.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I guess I don't think houses are like crypto, where it can go up 40% in 2 days and then it'll drop that 40% too. I don't think that happens that way with housing.
It is the quickest path to generating wealth. And yeah, once you get out of the rent game, it really changes your life. So if that's the goal of yours, I would say, don't give up, make it a priority, and put it to the forefront, and start creating vision boards and whatever you do to manifest your dreams.
Like get tattoos on your body, like the dude from Memento. No, I think that was because he had syphilis, isn't it? Ooh, that was a spoiler. No, anyways, hey, I want to talk about one more thing. Thank you so much for giving us some info on the housing market. Sure. This is completely unrelated to what we were talking about today, but I do want to talk to you about it. You hosted an event recently for kids that was a little out of the ordinary. Can you tell me about it?
Well, actually, I guess I co-hosted. It was actually Erica's idea, Orion's mother, but it's called My First Rave. And yeah, it was just like this little event that we threw for kiddos. Really, we didn't have an age limit, but we had a DJ, Tina Turner, come out, and she spun some records, and all the kids got dressed up in their rave gear. We had like a big glow in the dark room, and they were just dancing and running around, being silly and having a good time.
It was pretty rad. The pictures and videos that I saw, there was inflatable suits, like the big dinosaur costumes and whatnot.
Yeah.
And black lights, and kids wearing bright neon colors.
Yeah.
And costumes and things like that. So My First Rave, is this something that you're going to do like quarterly, annually? I mean, it was a success for sure.
Yeah. I think it'll happen quarterly. We're going to try to find like different themes to do throughout the year. It sounds like the next one's probably going to happen at Blair Alley. So
Oh, cool.
yeah, we'll have all the games there for the kiddos too.
And that's a barcade. So when it's like an all ages event, the whole theme would probably kind of change, like as far as who's there, you know.
Yeah, I mean, basically kiddos have to leave by 9:30 and there's bedtime and everything anyway.
Sure.
So it'd be kind of an earlier event.
Yeah, it was pretty cool to see a dance party for kids. You know, you don't see that very often. I thought it was great. I thought the marketing was good. You guys did great with it. And so, yeah, anybody in the Lane County area, keep your eyes open for My First Rave. And there's a Facebook page, correct?
Okay.
For My First Rave. So you can go follow that so that you can get notified about the upcoming events. That was a really cool thing. And I was impressed with that idea. So shout out to Erica for that. And you put in some work too. Well,
Yeah.
Vince Casey, thank you so much. And thank you so much for sponsoring the show. Like I had mentioned before, if you're listening or watching and you'd like to become a sponsor, you can go to STRPOD.com. If you have any show ideas, you can email me. We're going to be doing some fun stuff coming up next weekend. I'm going to be interviewing Mayor Sean Van Gordon, the Springfield, Oregon mayor. He's going to be in the studio. I'm really excited about it. We're going to talk about a lot of stuff that's going to be coming up on your ballot. And then I've got some fun interviews coming up too about healthcare. And I'm going to have later in the month, I'm going to be sitting down with Eugene City Councilor Randy Groves, former fire chief. That should be a really good episode. And then I've been in talks with KI Design from the Big Dirty. The end of October, early November, he'll be here too. Also, I don't know if you're listening, if you've heard this yet, but I'm going to be going to Washington, D.C. November 8th. I'm going to be taking the Spent the Rent podcast on the road. I'm not exactly sure what we're going to do, but keep your eyes peeled for some exciting stuff. I'll be going to the nation's capital the day of the election. So depending on what happens, I may or may not storm the Capitol. I don't know if it's illegal for me to joke about that because I am 100% joking. I will not be doing any destruction to anything. I want that to be clear. I won't be throwing like paint against the wall like just happened. Did you see that on the news? Someone chucked a whole can of paint on like the Washington Monument.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, which is not cool.
Good
But
times.
anyways, thank you so much for tuning in. Vince Casey, thank you so much.
Thank you so much.